is my pilot.
Now, I've got one more verse for you that illustrates this. In John's Gospel, chapter 13, let me give you an illustration. This is an actual occurrence, but it's an illustration and an acting out of the very thing we just read about. And it's Jesus putting this very principle into literal action. I think this is a beautiful passage, one of my favorites. John chapter 13, verse 1 says, this is, by the way, right before Jesus went to the cross to give Himself for us, to sanctify and cleanse us, and to make us without spot, wrinkle, or any such thing, by taking all those things away. But here, just before going to the cross, at what we call the Last Supper, look at what it says. John 13, verse 1. Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that His hour was come, and that He should depart out of this world unto the Father, having loved His own, which were in the world, He loved them unto the end. Now I like another translation that says, He now showed them the full extent of His love. He loved His own, and by the way, by extension, this is us also. He loves us, and now He wants to show us the full extent of His love. Verse 2, and supper being ended, the devil having now put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray Him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into His hands, and that He was come from God, and that He went to God, He riseth from supper, and He laid aside His garments, and He took a towel, and He girded Himself. Now when it said He laid aside His garments, it means His outer garments. It would be like if I were wearing a suit and a jacket. It would be like taking off my jacket and rolling up my sleeves. It doesn't mean He laid aside all of His clothes. It just meant He took aside His outer garments, and He was dressed now like a slave, for instance. And He laid aside His outer garments, and it said He took a towel, and He girded Himself, or He wrapped this towel around Himself, and verse 5, and after that He poured water in a basin. He began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with the towel wherewith He was girded. He laid aside His outer garments, and He took a basin of water and this towel, and He got down on the ground and began to wash the feet of the disciples. Now there were many kinds of servants, and there were many kinds of slaves in this day, but the one who had to wash the feet was the lowest of the low. You know, that was the most undesirable position for servants, because in those days they didn't have a bathroom with plumbing. They didn't have sewers. The streets were a nasty, filthy, stinking mess. And they were dirt streets, and the sewage ran down through the streets, and animals were running up and down the street. And if need I say more? And if you walked out in the street, you were liable to get all of that mess, all of that what comes out of the animals, and the sewage from the restrooms. All of that was running in the street. And if you walked in the street in sandals and you came into the house, you had all that on your feet. So there was a servant whose job it was to wash the feet. Now listen, I guarantee you, this is not the job that the servants all fought each other for that job. This is the job that nobody wanted, that the servant, the bottom of the totem pole, so to speak, had to do this job. But Jesus, He said, He's now going to show them the full extent of His love for them. He got down on the floor and took a towel and took the water, and He began to wash all of that mess off of their feet. Now notice He didn't accuse them. He didn't browbeat them. He didn't say, listen, what's with you, disciples? Don't you know who I am? How dare you come into my presence with this filth on you? He didn't say anything about it. He just got down and washed it off. See, I think this is a beautiful analogy to what we just read about how He washes us with the washing of water by the Word. The spots and wrinkles that we accumulate in our lives, He doesn't point His finger at us and shame us and call us names and say, how dare you come into my presence? Just like this picture here, He gets down and washes all those things away from us. And literally He did this when He was at the cross. But He says He wants to show them the full extent of His love. And by the way, can I say, we just read about Judas Iscariot. It said Simon's son. Judas is the one who betrayed Jesus. And did you know that he's still here? He's still present at the supper. Jesus went and washed the feet of Judas, the one who He knew would betray Him. And nevertheless, He still He treated him the same way. He treated him with the same kind of love, the same kind of forgiveness. He washed the feet of Judas, the betrayer. He washed the feet of all the disciples. When He came to Peter, however, the next verse says, verse 6, when He came to Simon Peter, Peter said to Him, Lord, do you wash my feet? Or Jesus, He was shocked. Are you going to wash my feet? See, Peter knew this isn't right. You're the Lord, and you're down here on the floor like a servant. Jesus said and answered and said, what I do now, you do not know, but you shall know hereafter. Well, we know because we just read it in Paul's epistle. He was giving an illustration of how Jesus, was going to remove all the filth that could accumulate on us in our lives. Jesus, would do that and clean us and sanctify us by what He did. So He says, you don't know what I'm doing now, but later on you'll understand what I'm doing. Peter said, thou shalt never wash my feet. This sounds just like Peter, Well, you're never going to wash my feet. Jesus said, if I wash thee not, you have no part with me. In other words, a Christian is a person who, you've got to let me do this. You've got to let Jesus be the one that cleanses us. So if you're going to have a part with me, let me wash you and clean you. See, that's what it means as a Christian. He has washed us. He has cleansed us. Simon Peter said to Him, okay, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and head. He's at the other extreme. Not just my feet, then wash all of me. And He says, he that is washed needeth not save his feet, but he is clean every whit. And you are clean, but not all. For He knew who should betray Him. Therefore He said, you're not all clean. He means you are clean in the sense that you're believing in me. And as my disciples and as my followers, I don't need to wash all of you. I don't need to go and save you again. I don't need to go and make you my disciple again. But what He's pointing out here is that by walking in life, by living our lives and walking through our lives, things happen and things accumulate and things get on us and things defile us, especially in our conscience. But He wants you to know that He, Jesus, has taken on Himself the responsibility of washing us and cleansing us. He says, look, Peter, I don't need to go wash you and give you a bath. I just want you to know that I'm washing off what got on you from the world. I'm washing the world off of you, and I, Jesus, am keeping you clean that way. Verse 12. So that after He had washed their feet and had taken His garments, and was set down again, He said to them, know ye what I have done to you? Or do you know what I have done? Well, they knew that He'd washed their feet. But what they didn't understand was, number one, what the spiritual significance was. And number two, they didn't understand what the point He was trying to make about how He, Jesus, as the Lord, took on the role of the servant and washed their feet. Verse 13, He said, you call me Master and Lord, and you say, well, for so I am. Verse 14, if I then, your Lord and Master, have washed your feet, you ought also to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should do as I have done. Now, honestly, I don't really think that Jesus meant that we should literally get together and take our shoes off and get water and wash each other's feet. Though that doesn't hurt anything, but there's something more important that He's saying. He said, if I, Jesus, am the Lord, and I didn't point fingers at you, and I didn't accuse you, and I didn't say, how come you came in here with dirt on your feet? I washed you, and I washed what defiled you. You ought to treat one another with the same kind of forgiveness, the same kind of mercy, the same kind of love. Or as Paul tells us elsewhere in the epistles, just as Christ has loved you and forgiven you, you ought also to love and forgive one another. So, the point is, we live our lives focused on Christ, who loved us, who gave Himself for us, who washed us and cleansed us and sanctified us. But then if we understand the way He loved us that way, when we walk with one another, we can apply that same kind of love and mercy and forgiveness. And guess what? That makes our lives and the lives of everyone we contact wonderful, because we're touching something that came from Jesus. Okay, let's all stand up this morning.